Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, January 6, 2021 public hearing for the City of Tampa's Architectural Review Commission. Welcome, everyone. My name is Zachary Greco, Chair of the Commission. If you're here to present a project, you will have limited time to make your presentation, so we suggest being thorough but concise. When coming to the microphone, you will need to identify yourself and your relationship to the project. The commissioners will not ask any questions during your presentation. Your project should be presented in the following order: site plan, elevations, architectural details, and wall sections. Staff will then present the staff report and will then ask for public comment. Following your presentation, the commissioners will be asking questions in the same order as the presentation. Please state and spell your name clearly if you are here to speak for or against a project. Your time will be limited to 3 minutes, so take some time now to summarize your comments because 3 minutes go by very quickly. Following public comment, the applicant will have 5 minutes for a rebuttal. The public hearing will then be closed. The only comments which will be allowed after the public hearing is closed will be in response to any questions from the commissioners. The commissioners will then discuss the case and will make their decision based on the City Ordinance, Chapter 27 of the City Zoning Code, the Design Guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior Standards, the Historic Preservation Development Review Comments, HPDRC, and the testimony given at this public hearing. The ARC can only act on items that are within our specific jurisdictional responsibility. Owner and agents are independently responsible to obtain any appropriate permits and or approvals. If you haven't done so already, please silence all cell phones. And at this point, I will ask my commissioners on my left to introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Sutton. I'm a registered architect.
Excuse me, Kamaria Pettis-Knuckle from the City Attorney's Office. We're going to have to pause just for a second, okay?
Again? My name is Stephen Sutton. I'm a registered architect.
No, we're going to pause for a second. Sorry.
One more time. Good evening. My name is Stephen Sutton. I am a registered architect.
Shauna Boyd, interior designer.
Ashley DeCubis, I'm an attorney.
We are also joined here tonight by city staff, Dennis Fernandez, Ron Vila, Beverly Jewasek, and Kamaria Pettis-Knuckle.
Good morning. Or, no, I'm sorry. It's been a day. Kamaria Pettis-Knuckle from the City Attorney's Office. Will the commissioners please state on the record whether or not they have any conflicts of interest regarding regarding the item that's on the agenda?
I do not.
None.
Additionally, will the commissioners state whether or not they've had any ex parte communication regarding the item that's on the agenda?
No.
No.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Ron Vila. I'm staff with Historic Preservation. Moving down the agenda, under continuations, we have none reflected. So we're going to move to the swear-in. Ms. Juzak will swear everybody in. Everybody that wishes to testify, please stand up and raise your right hand. I do. Moving forward to the agenda item, which is ARC 20-401/REZ-20-80. This is for the address of 815 South Rome. This is in the Hyde Park Historic District. The request this evening is a recommendation for a rezoning from RS50 to PD, which includes the incorporation of transfer of developmental rights. Briefly going through the photo presentation. Just want to give you just a little bit of background. This was part of a larger overall project that the house that's on the site was relocated. This illustration shows 815 Rome, which is the subject site that we'll be talking about this evening. And the current house that's there that will be indicated on the photo essay has been relocated or will be relocated to the Fremont address, which is 910 Fremont. This is our overall vicinity map. Property in question is highlighted in the green area. This illustration is to show you the location that it is incorporated into the Hyde Park Village area. Then you see the fabric of the residential components that are around the subject site. Looking from above, this is the subject site, which faces Rome, 815 Rome. To the south, you have Bristol. To the west, you have Packwood. And there is an alley behind 815 Rome that runs north and south. This is showing the house at 815 Rome. And the rest of the photos are just to get you familiar with the site and some of the site conditions. This is a vehicular driveway off of Rome. You see a small knee wall that encompasses the site. Looking where the vehicle is at, there's a continuation of the parcel that has a nice canopy of live oaks around it. This is looking at the subject site from the alley as we go around to the rear, and taking that same perspective, looking at the rear of the structure. So you get a feeling of the site. Some of the surrounding properties. This is the non-contributing structures to the north. Directly across Rome, you have a portion of Hyde Park Village. And then to the south, you have the Kate Jackson house. And this is new construction, it's non-contributing. Some street shots. This is looking back into the village from Rome to Snow Avenue. Turning around, looking towards Bay Shore down Rome. And to conclude, this is just the condition of the alley that runs north to south behind the property. At this time, my manager will address the board.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architectural Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Wanted to just take a moment to reintroduce this case. By now, I'm sure you have recognized that this case was on a prior agenda, was actually before you in November of last year, and that was on the 4th, on November 4th, along with a certificate of appropriateness request to relocate the current structure to a site within the Hyde Park Local Historic District. That accompanying case was approved. The certificate of appropriateness was issued that evening, and you did prepare a recommendation for City Council under your powers and duties dealing with land use changes. So this is a request for a planned development zoning. It is going to a use that is going to be site plan controlled, which the agents will review in just a moment with you. The reason that it has come back is that subsequent to the hearing, staff was made aware, or the issue was clarified, that there would be a placement of additional intensification on the site through a program that's called Transfer of Development Rights. Transfer of Development Rights is located in Chapter 27, Section 141 of the City of Tampa zoning code, and essentially it reads that the intent of the Transfer of Development Rights program allows the transfer of unused development rights from properties which are intended to be preserved to designated receiving areas. In this case, the subject property is being requested through the PD to be a designated receiving area, which would place additional intensification in the form of square footage on this particular property and the development. Staff, through discussion with the applicants, made it clear that we felt that that item should be expressed to the commission so that you understand that's part of the scale, massing, site orientation, site coverage, is a result of these transferred development rights. In just a moment, your legal counsel will provide you some direction for the hearing. I do have the motion that you made at the end of your hearing in November. I'll place that on the overhead when you get into your deliberation. You do not have a approval or denial capacity with the transfer of development rights themselves. That is an administrative process. However, you do have the ability within your recommendation to comment on its effect on the scale and massing and the other items that are listed within your staff report. This is considered to be a rehearing, so you will be getting a complete presentation in addition to some supplemental information that we requested that the applicant and their agents apply. They will go through that with you momentarily. We have also with us this evening representatives from the zoning division and the transportation division. So as you get into your questions and answers, if you have additional questions related to the PD itself, we have the staff resources here for you this evening. And with that, I'll ask our legal counsel just to review your responsibilities for this evening's review. Thank you.
Good evening. Again, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel for the record. Commissioners, as you go through your analysis, your guidance is under Chapter 27, Section 27.113, and your specific authority is to review and recommend reasonable land use changes to the extent necessary to preserve the historical integrity and appearance of the locally designated landmark. Landmark site, multiple property designation, etc. And whatever recommendation the commission decides, I'd again ask the commission to state with specificity the reason for your recommendation, or the reason why you don't want to recommend to City Council. And again, it's just a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe we're ready for the presentation at this time.
Good evening. Truett Gardner, 400 North Ashley Drive. I actually stepped out for a second, so I was not sworn. But I swear I'll tell the truth. I did. Again, Truett Gardner, 400 North Ashley Drive. With me tonight are Stephen Smith, who's the project architect, my law partner Tyler Hudson, and then John Touchton, who is the property owner and the applicant for this project. As Dennis mentioned, we were last in front of you on November 4th, and we gave a comprehensive presentation on this project. In particular, we presented the proposed relocation of the structure that currently rests on 815 South Rome to a new and what we believe a more suitable location at 910 South Fremont. We also requested your recommendation to rezone the property to allow for a residentially scaled office building to be located on the 815 South Rome property. We received your unanimous support for the approval of the relocation of the structure, and we also received the ARC's unanimous recommendation for the rezoning. Since our positive hearings in November, absolutely nothing about this project has changed. As a result, you might be wondering why we're back in front of you this evening. We're back for two primary reasons. One is some of you all will probably recall the discussion we had on the north elevation of the property, specifically related to the eaves and its relationship with development to the north. So we wanted to delve into that issue more, and Stephen Smith is going to address that. But secondly is the issue that Dennis raised, which is the transfer of development rights, or the TDRs. Stephen's going to spend some time on this topic as well, but I thought I'd start, since it's a relatively novel item in the city's code, start with just generally what a TDR is. And with that, we've got a graphic. So by definition, what a TDR is, it's a market-based planning tool that allows for the preservation of historic structures in exchange for development rights being transferred to another property. So on this graphic, you'll see the property on the right side, the one that says sending site above it. that is a historic structure, and the transparent box above it are the potential entitlements that that property has. And so what is happening is that owner of that sending site is transferring and is receiving funds in order to transfer its entitlements to the receiving site so that receiving site can gain some additional density. And it's a tool that's used throughout the country. We actually were a part of a development in St. Pete where TDRs were used, and the funds for those went to the Snell Arcade, which is a beautiful building downtown, and those funds are used to help in the preservation of that building. So this is it's a new process for Tampa. I think it was implemented in the code in 2016, and this is actually the first time it's been utilized, and which was part of the nature of our desire to come back to you tonight. In our instance, and this gets into a little bit more of the why we are requesting the TDR, our underlying future land use designation is R10, which is a very restrictive residential classification. And as we discussed it the last time, given the unique location of this property being really at the entrance to Hyde Park, the way the roads all converge, we wanted this to be a transition from the very dense and intense Hyde Park development down to the residential behind, but unfortunately we're trapped with this R10 designation. So in order to make this project work, we needed some additional density to the tune of just over 2,000 square feet. And from an FAR perspective, it takes under this R10 category, the max you can get is a 0.35, and what we're requesting here is a 0.53, so it's an FAR increase of 0.18. We looked at several different ways to achieve this additional square footage, and we also brought the neighborhood leaders into this discussion as well. Our main two choices were as follows. One is a comprehensive plan amendment, which you've seen before, and where we would take this R10 designation and propose a much more dense designation. And talking to the neighborhood and also just wanting to do the right thing for the district and for this property, we steered clear of that because, one, there's no assurance if this is done. It's going to densify the site. It can't be tailored to just the square footage that we're asking. It's going to be a wholesale increase in density. And then also, there's no promise that goes along with it. So if John Tutchin didn't move forward with his office development and it fell into the hands of another developer, they would be given the benefit of the additional square footage. And so we discovered in the code and talked to Dennis about it early on, this TDR provision, and we felt like it was the far better way because it's a much more surgical approach, and we have specific notes on the site plan that detail how this TDR will work. We're actually not even guaranteed that now. On the illustration, you'll see the sending site. We do not have a sending site chosen, and so if for whatever reason we can't find a sending site, then we'll be restricted to just what is allowed under the R10 designation. So it is tailored to this development. It's a part of this PD, and we felt like this was the better way to go than a comprehensive plan amendment, and that was also agreed to by the neighborhood stakeholders. And again, just to repeat and to put it out there, and we had a lot to unpack at our November 4th hearing. This was an item that wasn't discussed, but in full transparency, our notes first appeared on the site plan in July of last year, and we went to the DRC, came back with our site plan revisions, and they were repeated again on the site plan last October. So the site plan that you did review in November had the exact same TDR notes that we have on the site plan currently. Finally, in advance of this hearing, we went back to the neighborhood stakeholders who were involved before. You may remember Mary Lou Bailey, who spoke at length at the last hearing, to inform them that we were going back specifically with this discussion of the TDRs. John reached out to them, and basically they're still in full support of this project and feel like this TDR application and way of going about things is the better alternative than a plan amendment. And so we're more back to, since this is a novel request, to inform you about it, and then also to go back through the site plan and the design aspects, which Stephen Smith will do, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hello, Commissioners. Stephen Smith, Cooper Johnson Smith Peterson, architects and town planners here in Tampa. I apologize that I'm back before you and to go through this project. I promise I will not go and do the 30-minute long version, but I'll try to hit the high notes. And if you have any questions while I'm going through it, just please let me know. If you're hearing too much, say stop. Stop with all that. But I'll try to kind of refresh your memories. I'll start with this image. Okay. Not sure how this works to focus or back out of it.
They did
Okay.
it for you. We can see it.
Okay, thanks. What this is a zoning diagram of Hyde Park, with Hyde Park Village being the big light-colored PD in the center. And in the previous presentation, how I started was essentially saying that Hyde Park has, like much of Tampa, has very simplistic zoning with RS 50 on one side of Rome Avenue, RS 60 on the other, and really is not fine-grained enough to work with mixed-use, vibrant town centers and mixed-use neighborhoods like Hyde Park. So Hyde Park is full of little localized and then larger PDs like you can see on this excerpt. And besides the village itself, the PDs that we see on the edges of it occur because they are reacting to the intense density of the village as it's grown over time from being what I remember as a child and is still part of the village right now to what it's become right now, which is a great neighborhood center. It just has changed scale. There's over 1,000 seats of restaurant seating, tens of thousands of square feet of retail and office, and the intensity has been such that neighboring properties have tried to defend themselves from the village in terms of things like traffic, street markets, service vehicles, people wandering up in their yards, asking where the bathroom is, parking and dashing, all kinds of things. So we tried to show that the site is no longer viable for a residence, and then propose what we felt was a great transitional use, which is an office, a small-scale office building that is residentially scaled, small square footage, and I'll bring up the site plan. It's a rendered site plan, a little easier on the eyes than the black and white drawing, but a building type that is the lowest intensity of commercial building types to act as like an end cap for the end of the axis of Snow Avenue and Hyde Park Village in general. And much like the community center just south of it, Kate Jackson, and almost fortress-like condominium buildings just to the north of it, this building type is trying to add a little bit of protection to the single-family residences to the west. And in terms of how it's laid out on the site, the building is pulled forward like a residence would be. Its setbacks are similar to the residences on the same block. There's 7 feet on the side. There's 10 feet at the front elevation and then steps back to right at 15. It's 14.9 feet. And then 15 on the corner the narrowest is 7. And just to point out that the setback, if this were a single-family house on the corner, is 7 feet in this area of Hyde Park. There are residences just 2 or 3 doors down that are 10 feet from the sidewalk as well. So we feel like we're using the same setbacks. Our massing and our height, we are adhering to the 35 feet, which is the height, maximum height in Hyde Park. Most houses, a lot of the older ones in different styles with great pitched roofs exceed it. Our neighbor to the north, the condos, is at 35 feet as well. And then in the rear of the property, what we are showing as a walled and landscaped auto court in the rear with parking that is concealed behind landscaping, both from the street as well as off of the alley, so that the neighbors adjacent are not looking at cars. And then pedestrians on the sidewalk, the same thing. They're seeing a hedge, a high hedge, and not looking at cars. Going quickly to the elevations and the massing. Again, the 35 feet of height, the wide elevation along Rome, and the narrower corner elevation. Some views of a digital rendering from Bristol, looking towards the parking garage on Rome, and showing what I was trying to describe as this landscaped and hedged walled parking court. We're proposing a residentially scaled and detailed entry gate into that. So the hopes are, like this rendering, that you really don't see the tops of cars beyond. And our hopes are that folks might even confuse our building with a residence. The view from the corner of Bristol and Rome. Again, the building stops about here, and this is this parking court. Then the view as you're driving from Snow, looking straight onto the property. And what's very typical most of the time, there seems to be some kind of maintenance or service vehicle parked in front of the property for the village. I show these to kind of repaint the picture of what the building is like, its size and scale, and then wanted to address this idea of why we need this additional couple thousand square feet. Maybe if we could, oh, thanks, thank you. What we did was we've done some basic early schematic design to get an idea of what is the usable square footage within our envelope. And with office buildings, commercial buildings in general, you need a lot of stuff to support the actual usable space. So the area for 2 stairs, an elevator, the mechanical area, janitors, bathrooms, entry lobby, those sorts of things take up quite a bit of space. And office buildings are measured in terms of their efficiency, in terms of their viability normally. And out in the marketplace, developers are shooting for 80 to 85% efficiency with net usable versus these support spaces. And As John mentioned back at the hearing, that this building doesn't make sense for anyone else but John's needs, because our building as it is designed is 68% efficient. So really kind of missing that 80 to 85% mark, but it works well for his very unique program. He's not proud of the fact that it's a very inefficient building, neither am I, but it is what it is. We wanted to illustrate to you guys what it would be like if we worked within the square footage, the by right square footage without the density transfer. And the building, as you can see, comes down to 56% efficiency. So nearly half of the building becomes all those spaces that you really can't use for the office function. So this is, one of the reasons why it's very important for us to have that additional. So it seems like we have the right building type, we have the right occupant for it, light density, daytime use, very little parking requirements. We just need a little bit more square footage. I think Truett had told me that had this, hopefully I have this right, that if this were not office, if this were a multifamily residential project, we could have this square footage and perhaps more. And it's evidenced by the condominium, the townhouse project just to the north, because when we look at that and look at the mass of those buildings, this is not a very scientific diagram, but we think each of those are rather large. They're 3-story townhouses, and if they were 3,000 square foot each, it seems like there's, on their site, which is a little bit bigger, there's 12,000 square feet of building on it. So my point is, it's not unusual to have a bit more square footage on these sites that's facing a mixed-use center. Changing a bit to the subject of something that was a sensitive area or concern at the last hearing was the separation of our proposal from those townhouses next door. So I wanted to take this opportunity, since we were in front of you again, to just show you that and maybe ease your minds on that north setback with the neighbor. So this photograph is showing the condition with the existing house. It's 5 feet off the property line. And then here's the 3-story condominium building next to it that's a bit further off the line. And I'll show you a diagram there, but wanted you to see how we align with them. Another view of the neighbor. Luckily, we have their side is facing our side. Again, another view. And then here's the existing condition. So if the dashed line is the property line, and here's the profile of the existing cottage, and then we measured the profile of the townhouses and their height as well for comparison. And there's 13 foot 4 inches from the eave of the cottage to the eave of the townhouses. And then in comparison, this is our proposal, which our building is pulled a couple of more feet away from the property line than the present cottage. But our overhang, we're proposing it to be a little bit bigger, but we have the same, we have 13 foot 6 eave to eave with the townhouse. So I wanted to say that we'll be careful about that we'll have a similar eave to eave setback that exists today. Typically in Hyde Park with 7 foot setbacks, buildings are about 14 feet face to face, building face to building face. And given some of the smaller overhangs at 2 feet, that would place them at 10 feet eve to eve. So I'd like to say that we'll be 3.5 feet wider than probably most of the houses in Hyde Park. And then we know there's conditions where outbuildings are basically almost touching. So wanted to touch on that while we had your attention. But okay, that's it, and I'll see if you have any questions.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes.
All right, thank you. At this point, staff will present the staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Your staff report for this evening is very similar to what you had in front of you in November. We believe that the content of the presentation more adequately described the processes. I do think that there probably needs to be a reading of the waivers that are being requested. Number one, to get those on the record, but also visually for you to understand where there are some relief being sought. I'm going to jump over to this overhead. Okay. In your motion in November, you made a recommendation for approval of the PD with 3 considerations. The first was that the final solution of the historic retaining wall be approved during the ARC approval process. Second was the final solution for the solid waste buffering be provided. And then the third was the discussion on that north side yard setback, and where the commission ended on that was to request the city council allow you an area of 2 to 3 feet that is able to be adjusted during the ARC review process. That would be the certificate of appropriateness process. Consistent with the motion, the staff found that the request is consistent with the parameters of development in the Hyde Park Historic District. Your motion was approved 4-0 that evening as well. So if you, I'll go ahead and leave this on the overhead for your consideration if you want to incorporate those or similar points into your motion this evening. And as I said, in additional to myself, we do have other staff members from the city that can answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we will open the hearing to any public comment who would like to speak for or against. Seeing none, the commissioners will now begin asking questions regarding the project. And then maybe before we ask questions, could you or maybe the architect go through the waivers as staff mentioned and just go through those quickly before we ask questions?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I meant to do that during my presentation. But we did have 3 waivers. I submitted at the last hearing a memorandum on each of those, but I'll just run through them real quickly. And they are, if we could show the... So first and probably the easiest to describe is a reduction in parking from a required 23 parking spaces to 16. This was actually a large discussion with the neighborhood. They did not want to see a sea of parking, and given John's use, which is just a professional office for him, which is the least intense of the commercial uses, we felt that that was adequate, and that's supported by the neighborhood at large. And then 2 is to reduce the required use buffer, and this is on the north property line, from 15 feet with a 6-foot CMU wall to 3 feet with the existing fence that is shared with the townhome development to the north. And that was born out of discussions with the townhome development. They wanted to see their existing fence remain. You probably saw it in the pictures. It fits the motif of their development with the red brick and Then the final one is to reduce the required vehicular use area buffer along the alley. So it's this area here, and in particular, it's this landscaped area from 8 feet to 5 feet. So those were the three waiver requests.
So, quick question then. The document that you gave to us to have in our record, this one, it has mentioned 5 different waivers. Is that different than what you are indicating tonight?
So let's see, I actually gave you 2 memos before. One was on the city's PD criteria and our responses to those. And then, let me look real quick. We actually started this project with, I think it was 7 waivers and then dwindled it down to 3. But in the memo, no, it's still just the 3 waivers. It's a little bit convoluted in the way it's structured. On page 1 of that memoranda, if you're looking at the same one, it mentions parking waiver, which is waiver number 1, and goes through the waiver criteria on it. And then beginning on page 3 at the top are the 2 buffer waivers, waiver number 2 and waiver number 3. And then since those were linked, we did a separate waiver criteria for those. Is that the same one you're looking at, Chairman?
No, so we have, our first waiver that we have is section 27-283.7. It's a
Mhm.
reduction of, this one says, to reduce the required parking from 22 to 16 spaces. You mentioned earlier that it's actually 23, and I think that's because your building grew by about 300 square feet from previous. Second one is section 27-283.12, to reduce the aisle width at entrance from 20 feet to 16 feet to provide additional separation from existing street trees.
So that one was eliminated. My apologies. What's the date on the memorandum that you have?
December 22nd.
Okay. So this is November the 4th, which is the date of the hearing. Interesting. But, so the one that you just mentioned, we're no longer requesting.
Okay. Then the next one is section 27-284, to reduce the required buffer along the north property line from 15 feet with a 6-foot CMU wall to 2 feet with an existing 6-foot metal fence subject to the district in lieu payment at the time of permitting.
So proper code section, but slight change. We actually were able to increase that area. So now it's to reduce the required use buffer along the north property line from 15 feet with a 6-foot CMU wall to 3 feet instead of 2 feet with an existing 6-foot metal fence.
Okay. Next one, section 27-284.3.3, to reduce the required vehicle use or buffer along along alley from 8 feet to 5 feet, subject to district in lieu payment at the time of permitting.
Correct. Yes, that's our final waiver.
Okay, and then on this one, it's section 27, it's the same number, but it's to reduce the required vehicle use area buffer to north property line from 3 feet to 1 feet, subject to the district in lieu payment at the time of permitting.
No longer being requested.
Chair.
Ryan Manassi with Development Coordination. I just want to make it very clear what the waivers are, because on the rezoning staff report, they are listed as well. It sounds like you guys went through them all really good. I just want to make one clarification. I believe you said 22 parking spaces for waiver number 1, and it is 23 spaces to 16. But I wanted to throw this on screen so you guys would be able to see the listed waivers that will be presented to City Council, the 3 waivers, and then this last one with their appropriate code sections by them. If you did have any questions on them, I'd be happy to answer them as well.
Thank you.
Add the 3 waivers that Mr. Manasseh showing are the exact 3 that we presented to you tonight.
Okay, thank you. Well, do any of my fellow commissioners have any questions they would like to ask either for the agent or for staff at this moment?
If I may, I'd like to start, please. I'd like to open up again your review with us of your proposal for the transfer of development rights, please. Am I correct in understanding that at this point in time, you do not have a companion or a site that is currently involved with your development process for that transfer to actually happen?
Great question, and the answer to that is yes. As Dennis was alluding to, the process for the TDR is actually an administrative process, where a site is identified, it is evaluated by the city, then a document is agreed to and recorded that would basically reduce the potential density of the sending site. And so all that still has to occur going forward. So as a result of that, and this is again the novelty of this, what we did, the way that the notes are written on our site plan, is that we intend to utilize the TDR, but as I mentioned during my presentation, if for whatever reason we cannot identify a sending site, then we'll be bound to the square footage that's currently allowed under the R10, which is the 0.35 FAR. So to answer your question short, we have not identified the sending site.
Then, sir, a companion question to that. If a TDR is not identified and placed under contract mutual with your development, how does that affect your proposed development as seen on these documents?
So again, we'd be bound to only what the R10 category allows. So you're probably looking at it from the ARC's perspective, one, this project would most likely be untenable, so we're gonna find that sending site, but if it was to change the design of the project, we'd be back in front of you with the reduced square footage and the design that would comport with that.
So in other words, then, the design preliminary that we see here today is entirely dependent upon a successful TDR transfer?
Correct, yes.
Thank you very much. That's all I have for this moment.
Per your hearing in November, I was curious if any development has been made on the retaining wall or solid waste buffering that were conditioned in the previous hearing.
I'll defer to the architect on that.
Only to answer the question, only to say that we're still committed, as we were at the hearing, to save the significant parts of that retaining wall. And then with regards to the solid waste, I think what we will do when we come back and have a more developed site plan is we'll show an alcove where those receptacles can be on trash day so that they're not out in the alley. I think that was the concern, that the alley was filling up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll have kind of a niche there where they could go.
Okay. So would that maintain, if we make a recommendation for this to move forward, that would maintain as part of our condition?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions.
Actually, I was just wondering if Dennis or Ron, if you guys could put up the motion again for us? There, thank you. Okay, so going back to what you said, Shauna, these would remain as a part of the conditions?
Kamaria Pettisnaka from the City Attorney's Office. So, Madam Commissioner, so if those are your conditions that you would like to place,
We would need to place them in the.
We'll place them
Yes.
again.
yeah.
Mhm.
I actually feel that the last one was addressed more in detail during this hearing than it was last hearing.
Well, we can discuss it, I guess.
So I have a couple of questions. Inadvertently or not, we were presented with a narrative from the December 22nd. On there, it does mention that the project size was a little bit smaller than what is being presented again tonight. Also on a site plan as well, it looks like it was kind of crossed out and roughly 250 square feet were added to the project. So a few questions about that. One is that an additional square footage that you'd be pulling through the TDR process in order to make the building bigger? And then, I guess I'll let you answer that question first.
Yes. We aren't asking for any more square footage than our presentation. What we have, so this 6904 is what appears on the PD, and what appears on our site plan, the hardline site plan that you guys reviewed. For graphic reasons, in terms of a color drawing, I used this one, which had the previous number on it, but it was easier to read and present with because it had landscape rendered in and so on. But somewhere here I have the, and I believe at the original hearing I used both.
Do you have the, I guess, the actual site plan that you were mentioning? Because the one that we have
Yes.
with us does have the smaller square footage as well.
So just to be clear, and hopefully we're looking at the same,
Yeah.
the
there it
site
is.
plan that I have, which was our October 22nd submittal, which is what traveled with us to the November 4th hearing, has the square footage of what we're requesting at 6,904 square feet.
Yes.
So then, I guess maybe a question for staff is the documents that we were given and the December 22nd narrative, is that old and outdated, or is something, I guess, maybe changed?
Got the PD plan here.
Yeah, it does say.
I don't have, excuse me, Dennis Fernandez with staff. I don't have a copy of what was emailed to you, but the documents that are being shown tonight are the most current. We did validate that with the zoning staff person. So you should be referring to those numbers that are presented.
Yes. What I have right here is what in black and white was presented at the last hearing as well. It just wasn't as easy on the eyes, and it is what's in the PD. So here's the PD site plan, and then with the same drawing, with the 6904 placed on this. This is really just an enlargement of it. So all the setbacks are as presented, and all the elevation drawings, all the 3D drawings, they're based on this square footage. So sorry if I confuse things, but I felt like this could explain more of the idea of the landscaping and the buffering, and really kind of point out what was building and what was landscape. So apologies for confusion there.
Would it be an honest statement to say that from previous time till this time, our November hearing to today, the building grew roughly 250 square feet?
No,
The buildings-
not at all.
I think I have the answer. So I've got, which I brought these along just so you could see, in case you wanted to see it, the fact that we had our TDR notes on there. But I think the difference is what is in your package was our July 13th submittal, which was pre-DRC. That's the one that has this, I've got to really stretch my eyes even with my glasses to see it, but that's the one that looks like it's 6,664 square feet. And then in my left hand is our post-DRC, our refiling, which was submitted October 22nd, and which is the current one, has not changed since our hearing at all. And that's the one that states 6,904 square feet.
Okay, so then I guess the project narrative that you supplied to the city on December 22nd is just incorrect?
Correct, that was the original iteration.
Oh, okay. It's,
The date on your.
it's
the
the-
date
Yeah, it's on your
It's on your correspondence. It's
Your
December
correspondence
22nd.
is December 22nd, and it
Okay.
has all the information from July. So it has the 6,664 square foot commercial office building. It has, as we mentioned, the 5 different waivers, which I guess have changed. Has the different square footage for what's actually be requested by the TDR. Difference in parking counts, So that's what's, I think is a bit.
It
I
sounds
got
just
it.
like a clerical.
Yes, I think what that is, it's a resubmittal of the narrative, but that was based off of the original submittal.
I can see that.
But everything that you saw, just to clarify, in November is the same as what you're seeing tonight.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good question, then.
For the transfer of development rights, is that additional square footage coming from the Hyde Park Historic District, or is that gonna be coming from outside of the district? And I guess that might be a question you don't have an answer for if you don't know where that sending site is location.
So don't have an answer to. John and I have had this discussion before. Ideally, since it's a project in the district, we'd like for that to go, to be transferred from a property also within the district, but the way that the code is written, it doesn't bind it that way. But I think I'll let John elaborate if he wants. That would be the ideal, is to find a structure in the district, and we've been looking around for those. Obviously, from a demographic standpoint, there's other areas of town with historic buildings that may need it more, but we have identified some in Hyde Park that may have that need, including the one that I had thought of was the Musicale building in Hyde Park that seems to be in need of some enhancements. You want to elaborate on that, maybe?
Thank you. John Touchton, 2916 Villa Rosa. Thanks for your questions on this. A couple of things. I mean, my preference would be to find a property in Hyde Park proper and take the density from there. I've had early conversations with the property owner in Seminole Heights, which I believe that is easily available. My preference, again, would be something in Hyde Park. I don't believe that it's required. It's more of a personal preference than anything else, given this issue. Also, the Musicale, which was mentioned, I think we looked at it and discovered that it's maybe just outside of the district and wouldn't be eligible. I plan to work with staff to, if there are any sites that they know of that would be particularly well suited to as a TDR sending site, I'm open to the suggestions. But again, regardless, I'm bound by the requirement that we have it before we proceed.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then final question that I have is, so the parking reduction from 23 to 16, would that still be an issue if the square footage from the TDR was not brought over?
I just say, to the extent that we don't, and we now have a 4,500 square foot building instead of 6,900 square foot building, we probably need a lot less parking, and we're going to have a lot more dirt to park it on. But candidly, if that were to happen, the building isn't viable with the smaller size anyway. But if we did go forward with 4,500 square feet, the parking waiver wouldn't be required.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions either for staff or the applicant before we close?
No.
Okay. At this point, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for a rebuttal.
Not really a rebuttal, but Mr. Sutton, I was trying to put my finger on this, but I couldn't when you asked the question. But I did think it might be helpful, and Mr. Greco, I promise I'm gonna use the right version, the right numbers this time, but it's actually the same notes that were on our July 13th submittal, just with the updated square footages. And these are our two notes with respect to the TDR. The first is general note number 10, and which this will be a part of this PD should it be approved. Number 10, the building intensity of 6,904 square feet is composed of the maximum allowable intensity under the R10 future land use category and a transfer of development rights in accordance with section 27-141. And then note number 11, which Mr. Sutton, I believe this is to your point, prior to the issuance of the first building permit, a certificate of transfer for no less than 2,517 square feet, that's our deficit, of development rights shall be recorded in the public records of Hillsborough County in accordance with section 27-141. So I thought it would just be helpful just to read to you how we were handling this as a note since we don't already have the sending site identified at this time. And with that, I'll close. Appreciate the opportunity to come back to you again. It's been educational for us to learn about the TDR process, and hope it has been for you too.
Thank you. All right, at this point, we will close the public hearing. The commissioners will now begin discussing the case. Are there any items that commissioners would like to discuss?
I have no issue.
I have a couple of questions. Do we need to condition the sending site being identified, or is that covered in the requirement for the building permit?
I don't think we have the ability
Because
to.
It's not really
administrative,
necessary.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is not required, because you look at our opening page for the commission here, and it's noting a recommendation, a rezone from RS50 to PD includes incorporation of development transfer rights. That's why we are here tonight.
Right, but the city codes and the zoning will allow where that comes from. We can't dictate where that's either
No,
coming from.
we can't dictate that it happens, but the PD is predicated upon it actually
Right, the PD is,
happening.
it's based off of that, and it's already written into their site plan, but unless I'm misunderstanding, I don't think they need to.
They'll have to come back through the process if they don't.
Yeah, they don't need to tell us where it's coming from,
Mhm.
because that will already be determined
Agreed.
if they get it. So I don't think that needs to be a condition.
Mm-mm. No. I don't really, I mean, unless you guys disagree, I don't really see any conditions here this time around.
I still
would
think
s-
that we condition the solid waste buffering being updated per the hearing today and per the hearing on November 4th. And
The historic retaining wall.
the retaining wall as well. Yeah, I think that they did touch on the setback that was conditioned on the November 4th hearing
Mhm.
today with the diagrams of where the adjacent townhomes are and the new structure.
I would agree. I will say, whichever fellow commissioner would like to make a motion, make sure that what you say for conditions are very specific in order to make sure that it's easily understood and that it's short and concise.
I move to recommend City Council approve ARC 20-401/REZ 20-80 for the property located at 815 South Rome Avenue for the proposed rezoning from RS50 to PD. With the following conditions: that the historic retaining wall be maintained, and that the solid waste buffering be adjusted appropriately. For reasons that the proposal is a reasonable land use change to the extent necessary to preserve the historical integrity and appearance of the designated landmark.
I'll second the motion.
And then can the applicant or agent just on record state that you understand the conditions and don't have any issues? Could you just, go to the microphone just for record?
Truett Gardner, 400 North Ashley Drive, agent for the applicant. Yes, we agree.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? All right, motion passes. Thank you. Well, meeting is adjourned.